Hi, everybody. Mark DeJesus, and welcome to this episode of Transformed You. Going to be doing a solo episode today because what I want to do is I want to spend some time walking you through and almost using this as a coaching opportunity, a chance for me to speak into your life and to help you maneuver through something that I think we haven't been equipped in. And as I coach people and help them through various areas of their life, as I write materials that have to do with healing the heart, bringing freedom and transformation from the inside out, experiencing from the heart true change and true relationship connection, I find there's a subject that we bump into that we often don't know how to deal with. We don't know how to maneuver through. And it has to do with emotions. And today I want to talk about your emotions. And I want to walk you through some things, some statements, and I'm also going to ask some questions that will help guide you into becoming a more healthy, heart-aware person. You see, if you want to live heart-aware, and if you want to shepherd your heart effectively, you're going to have to learn how to process your emotional life in an effective way. And so I'm going to get into that in today's episode. If you find that the resources that we're producing and the materials we talk through, whether it's Melissa and I together or some of my solo videos that I put together, the books that I've written, the blogs, the materials, if it bears witness with you, it just resonates with you. And it's like, man, I have so many people say to me, it's breathing fresh air into my life. It's helping put perspective to stuff I'm going through. Many people say, I don't hear this subject being talked about like this. If you feel that in your life, I would encourage you, just take a moment. Go to markdejesus.com, click on the donate button, and help support this. We are in a full-time endeavor of helping people to be empowered to live a life that is healed and free. We are dedicating the valuable hours of our day to doing that, to helping you experience that in your life and in your journey. So in looking at the subject of emotions, what do you think about emotions? Where do you land in emotions? What should we as Christians do with our emotions? Now, I did some perusing through the history of emotions, and it's interesting because even the word emotion is not really a very old word. I mean, it goes hundreds of years back, but not too far back. If you look it up, where there was a realization of, hey, there's an emotional life. Before then, it was more passions and fueling things that were going on. Emotions were talked about, but not necessarily with that word emotion. And over the years, over the centuries, over the decades, and now in recent decades, there's more and more effort being put into, hey, we need to understand what emotions we're feeling. We need to kind of make sense of this because they're going on nonetheless. And we need to figure out a way to work on them. In fact, what I talk about today, if it blesses and helps your life, get a copy of the Heart Healing Journey, because in it, I actually dedicate some chapters, one of them specifically about working through your emotions. I also talk about working through memories and the healing of memories, even trauma and stuff like that. I go into deeper levels of what that's like. But first, what we want to do is we want to look at emotions from a standpoint of two extremes that we tend to fall into, right? There's a spectrum of ways that we approach emotions. And I find there's two ditches we fall into, and I'm going to name them with words that begin with S, okay? They don't summarize them perfectly, but you kind of get the gist of it in where you stand. And I'd like for you, even in the comment section, to put, where do you find yourself in your default setting? If you don't put any effort into it, where do you find yourself landing if you just went with the flow when it comes to the subject of emotions, right? The first end of the spectrum, in one ditch, is the stuffer. This is kind of the category of people that they take emotional aspects of their life, they shove it down, they suppress it. Maybe they do it intentionally. Something happens and they just intentionally shove it down. Or maybe even further step back in their value system, they don't see any need for dealing with emotions. So they're stuffing it and don't even realize it because they don't even allow themselves to even see there's emotion coming up. They make no room. There's no value for emotions. They see emotions as being too emotional. And why bother? Because they see us dealing with emotional things and dealing with the heart and emotional life. It's like, oh, that's That's for weak people. We don't need to deal with that. Maybe they'll spiritually take the subject and shove it away. And maybe you'll say, I don't need to deal with my past, or I don't need to deal with how I feel. Ignore your feelings. Many people say, don't pay attention to your feelings. And there can be, at times, some good advice in that, but then it becomes a blanket statement in how they deal with their emotional, relational, heart-connected world, right? But they say, they might even say, even dealing with the heart has nothing to do with emotions. Just land in truth, walk in truth, and there is some truth to that. But they don't make room because they don't value addressing emotions, because it takes some slowing down, it takes some facing fears, it takes dealing with stuff. It means having conversations, it means feeling vulnerable. It means those uncomfortable moments. So in this side of the spectrum, emotions get a bad rap. You bring up anything emotional and they're either awkward or they kind of snap back at you because it's like, this is phony baloney stuff. We don't need to deal with it. And most likely they're not emotionally aware. So if you ask them how their heart is doing, they may have a hard time really getting to the core central themes of what they're processing and learning in their relationship with God, themselves, and with others. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of this continuum, in another ditch, an opposite ditch, begins with an S, and they're not stuffers. I'd call them sulkers, okay? Meaning that you get swayed by every emotion. You struggle with your emotions. You feel very up and down all over the place. You may feel very hypersensitive. You may even call yourself, I'm too emotional. Some people may have said you're too emotional. You can get easily stuck in certain emotions that you can't find your way out. You can spiral into depression, spiral into hopelessness, spiral, and you find you can't climb your way out of it. You may feel as a victim to your circumstances, stuck in your prison of your emotions, and you can't seem to get out, and you feel so trapped, and you become victim to how you feel. Sometimes people in this category can be too introspective. They can be too emotionally analytical, reading into every emotion. And many times their translation of emotions can get hijacked because they feel something and then it spirals them down a train that maybe they don't need to, but it's where it took them because that was their interpretation of what they're feeling. And so you may find yourself on different ends of that continuum. Where do you find yourself? Now, I had an interesting conversation with my wife, with Melissa. We talked about this in looking over this subject. And her and I actually felt like we land in very similar aspects to this extreme. And what we found is we find ourselves dabbling in aspects of both ends. So you may find yourself, I'm more on the emotional sulker side. I'm more on the stuffer side. I got to work on some things. We found others can find themselves in this too, is you can find yourself in a place where you dabble into both. Now, here's where it happened for me is that I would not really pay attention throughout the day of like how my emotional life was doing. I just kind of put one foot in front of the other, very driven, very go get it, task oriented, make it happen, conquer the day. Then at the end of the day, I would feel very, very empty. As the busyness would stop, there'd be a great deal of emptiness. And I didn't know what to do with that. And so then I'd struggle with those feelings, and sometimes it'd go into deep despair and deep depression. Many times it would go into obsessive thinking. Sometimes panic attacks would happen, or certain addictions would take place and override because I would filling that place in my heart. There's an emotional lack, but I didn't know how to fill it because I'd spent most of the day just charged, go, 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 and didn't know how to pause and recognize the emotional areas of my life. Melissa said the same thing. She said, not in the same sense of like the driven behavior I talked about, but she would just like kind of just keep going, you'll be fine. And then have these times where it was like, I don't know how to deal with these things. I could recognize there's a problem, but didn't know how to get to the bottom of it. And then at times would spiral in obsessive tendencies or spiral in certain deep discouragement in areas, right? So where do you find yourself? One end of the continuum, or do you find yourself too kind of like where you can stuff for a season and then it all blows up and then you're like, oh, my life's coming to an end, and you struggle with that? Well, today what I want to do is I want to walk through some things that are going to be helpful to you. If you're someone that says, man, I've been considering doing coaching with Mark or with somebody, I think I need some counseling. Here's some things in this video, in this podcast, I'm going to give you as free tools for you to begin processing. And where I wanted to start first is, where are you on that continuum? And secondly, what I want to ask you is, what is your history growing up? What was the grid you were given in your family history of dealing with emotions? Now, interestingly enough, my parents, God bless them, I remember them looking at me one day and saying, man, Mark, you're sensitive in your creativity. You think of stuff. You know, at the time I was involved in singing and acting. They're like, you think of these things and you creatively express yourself. We don't know where you got that from, because we don't seem to have that. And you seem to have this emotional spectrum we don't know what to do with. It's kind of funny, kind of not. Like, okay, well, you're my parents. I need you guys to help me and to guide me, right? But the previous generations didn't have a lot of tools in how to deal with emotions. Most of the time, it was just ignored. You put one foot in front of the other. We got to survive. Many of our families went through wars. They went through deep casualties. Go back generations, and they went through a depression. They went through severe loss, famines, plagues, loss of loved ones. There's a lot of survival modes that went on, right? So now, as we're coming into time where, for the most part, most people are not fighting for their life, but they still have a sense of survival, maybe their finances, or maybe things are just, we live in a very busy productivity, very fast-paced, packed to the core society. Never stops, never takes a break, right? And so we have to understand, what's your emotional grid in your life? And there's some questions I'd like to ask you. Now, my grid growing up, and I joke about this a lot when I speak at places, I have an interesting mixture because I'm half Puerto Rican. My father's full-blood Puerto Rican, and my mom is Norwegian with a mix of Swedish, so Scandinavian mixture. These are two totally different cultures, right? I joke with people and say I'm very acquainted with living with both fire and ice inside of me because of my cultural background, right? And so there's two totally different responses, where on my dad's Latin side, on the Puerto Rican side, they can be very expressive, very outward, very like, at times very huggy, touchy, and celebratory, and very loud and boisterous, right? And those of you listening, watching this, you go, yeah, I get it, right? And whereas the Scandinavian side, a lot more reserved. You could walk in and may get a handshake, may not. You know, it's you might get a little bit of an icy greeting, depending, right? Because oftentimes what's formulated in our family becomes familiar norms in our culture. They become cultural mindsets that get passed down generation after generation. Some of it's good, some of it's not good. And so what we need to do is recognize that, because most of your default setting and where you lean is a combination of your generations and your upbringing. So what is your cultural upbringing when it comes to emotions, and where does it get off track? Is it more on the cold side? Is it more in the all over the place, red hot, but like a live wire just flying all over the place, no stability? What's your background in that? So now let's look and let's go to your upbringing. Okay, when you were brought up, what was your parents' response to your emotions? And so let's start with, first of all, when you felt something and you expressed it, what was the response? So if you were excited, were you told all the time, don't be too excited, calm down? We do that as parents, right? Our kids are so energetic and so filled with all this energy. We're always telling them, calm down, calm down, calm down, calm down, right? Sometimes we need to think about it for a moment. Go, wait, should I always be saying calm down? Because I don't want to crush that energy, because most of the time in adulthood, we lose the childlike innocence of enjoyment, right? That part of the spectrum of joy, peace, excitement, celebration gets lost. Do we know how to really celebrate? It's like a lot of times we don't know how to celebrate unless there's some kind of substance that people are using, some kind of drug or an alcohol or something that helps them to get there. We don't know how to just joyously celebrate. right? So what was the response to your emotions if you were sad or if you're having a tough time? What would be your mother and father's response to your emotions? Many people would say, I don't even know. So I'm going to go even deeper. Do you have memory in your life of having an experience with mom or dad where you felt comforted? You were going through something, and it doesn't matter if it was big or small, it's relative. If you feel something's a struggle, it's a struggle. It just is what it is, right? Sometimes we dismiss people because a kid's feeling something like, oh, you'll get over it. We go to the end bottom line, but we don't walk through the empathy stage of just recognizing for them right now, it's difficult. This is the problem between generations, is we can look at the younger generation and we lack empathy for what they're going through. But listen, that's their current reality of what they're struggling with. And if we don't have empathy, it's going to be a hard time for them to be equipped by what we have to offer. So go back to your own childhood. Do you remember being comforted? Or were there times when you were crying and they say, stop crying? Or did they dismiss it and say, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. Kind of shrug it off, right? And not really give value to what you're feeling. Because a big part of emotional equipping is we have experiences where we share something and we're validated. Not that everything we're feeling is 100% accurate and right, but we're just validated in that I understand that you feel that way. And then next level is, as we're walking through that, is learning to be able to be equipped in knowing how to articulate what we're feeling, being able to name it. This is what I'm feeling. And not just like, well, I'm upset. Well, what are you upset about? I'm disappointed. I'm angry because of, I feel frustrated. And now we start to create a map to see the things that are going on in our heart that God can begin working on, that we can mature and that we could grow through. Because folks, listen, you have to deal with your emotions some way, because the emotions that are toxic in your life, those travel through your systems. They infect your cells. They will infect your health, your relationships, and impact your relationship with God, with those around. It's going to affect you. So you can deny it in the suppressing stage, but at some point it's going to come out. And those of you that you're like a live wire all the time and you feel all over the place, or very emotional, but you feel unstable, it comes from a lack of equipping. Both sides come from a lack of equipping and knowing, how do I understand? But we are human beings who connect relationally, and that is done through exchange and processing of emotions and how you feel as you're connecting to someone else. You're meant to do this with God. You're meant to do this as you have your own inner dialogue with yourself, and you're meant to do this fruitfully with people around you. Now, what you have to understand is you have to understand that every single thought you have has a corresponding emotion attached to it. Otherwise, we would just be robots. So you say, well, I don't go by my emotions. Well, you have them. So you say, I don't live by my emotions. I know what they're saying. They're saying, I don't live by my emotional swings. Or they'll say, I don't live by my emotional pulls that pull me into areas I shouldn't. That's more self-control. That's not living by your emotions. That's operating out of a fruit of the Spirit, which involves self-control. You're able to see emotional states, discover things there, but you're not controlled and ruled by some of the dark places it can take you into. Hi, is this making sense so far? So every thought has a corresponding emotion attached to it. So if I ask you about your first day at school, the day you got married, the day you signed divorce papers, your first day at a new church, your first day on a certain brand new job, moving to college, it immediately creates an emotional association. So it's not so much the thought, it's the emotional association you have with the thought that creates movement. Emotions create motion to either avoid something, not do something, or to move towards something. You can be motivated to move forward or withdraw, all because of an emotional association. Isn't that wild? Your whole life, you say, I'm not driven by your emotions. Yeah, you are, because you make decisions, you feel it's the right decision. There's a connection. Now, you may say it's based on truth or it's based on, yes, that all may, but there is an association placed there. that then moves you into where you're going. And for so many, we lack equipping to go to a deeper level, to get more grounded, to let our emotional life be what it was intended to be, which was to experience life to the fullest. Jesus said, I've come to I was going to say Jesus come to steal, kill, and destroy. No, the thief comes only but to steal, kill, and destroy. John 10:10. Jesus said, I've come that you might have life and have it to the fullest. How are you going to sense that life if you're disconnected from your emotional life, or if you're trapped by disempowering emotions that you can't seem to snap out of or can't seem to break free from, right? It all goes back to being ill-equipped. So learning to identify your emotions is an important place to learn to practice, to develop that muscle. So if someone wants to sit down and say, how's your heart doing? What would you say? What would be your answer? What would be your expression? Do you know how to identify those things? Now, it'd have to be somebody who's safe and they've shown the respect of being a safe place to be able to be honest and share those things in safety. But let's go to a different question. Do you have a memory in your life where somebody has asked you, how do you feel about that? You know, it's shocking to me how sometimes we just don't take the time. Just ask one another, how do you feel about this? You see, I don't have the time. I'm so busy. I don't have time for that stuff. And it's emotionally exhausting. Right. When you say that, you've just articulated the danger of what we live in. It is the pull to constant busy living. And for the fight, if you're going to live a heart-aware life, if you're going to live a life that shepherds your heart, you're going to have to slow down. You're going to have to make margin for the stillness, for the nothing moments, to just be still, to just be still and know, to just be in that moment with nothing racing, to just be aware. I've had many times in my life where God has over and over again been working on my heart to slow down, slow down, slow down, slow down. My life now, the RPMs are so much slower than they were 10 years ago. But it's taken some patience and some learning. But here was the difficulty. I realized I had so much noise going on inside of me. And then I realized as I slowed down and made more and more margin, I was confronted with a profound sense of emptiness and an ache that I needed to invite God and learn how to process through that. But you're not going to be able to do that if you're not able to name what you're feeling. And so over the years, even psychologists or self-help people, we're working hard. Pastors and teachers that understand heart awareness, working hard at finding words that people use. So we just stay out of, well, I'm just angry. Well, I'm just anxious. I'm just nervous. To articulate deeper. Maybe there's more words. I wrote down a bunch of them, like admiration, embarrassment, adoration, grateful. I feel grateful. I feel appreciation. I'm appreciative, happy, content, silly, amused, in awe, awkward, bored, unfulfilled, conflicted, calm, confused, bitter, resentful, contempt. That's an interesting word. Disgust, emptiness, pain, excitement, joy, celebration. I feel worried, I feel terrified, I feel joy, I feel nostalgia, I feel relieved, I feel romance. Could add satisfaction, I feel satisfied, surprised, passionate. Right? We need an expansion. You may need an expansion of words. Now, just because, here's something to keep in mind. Just because you are feeling a certain emotion in a moment does not mean that that emotion needs to be a permanent sentence in your life. So just know that. And also understand, we spend a lot of time in our modern culture avoiding certain emotions that we don't want to feel, when in reality, there may be some beautiful treasures you can discover in there. For example, I didn't know how to be sad without it going into pity all the time or going into a kind of depressive state. I had to learn how to be sad and go, it's okay. God, I invite you into this. Be a part of this. Show me, speak to me, help me to see. I'm not going to just judge this and run away from it. I'm going to allow you to work in it. Now, if you're more aware of your emotions, you can be more aware of some of the spiritual battles that you're facing. Because your emotional state that you find yourself in where you might be struggling can actually be an identification to the spiritual warfare that's coming against your life. Because what is spiritual warfare? Primarily, it is the working of thoughts to come against you to then become a part of your thinking, believing, feeling, processing, taking action that now create limitations or dysfunction or manifesting the work of the steal, kill, and destroy that they talk about, the scriptures talk about in John 10:10, the thief. The enemy has an army to come against you. And if you're able to label your emotions, you may at times be able to label the war that's coming against you. Some people say, man, I feel a constant like dark oppression over me every day. Now, there could be many different factors going on. You know, we need to address your eating habits, your exercise, your routine. Are you worn out and burnt out? Are there some things you need to work through relationally? But you could be under attack of an oppression. You know, Isaiah 61 talks about a garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, right? You just feel heavy. And instead of just go to bed and wake up and keep going, pause and go, God, what's this all about? Now, how you process your emotions is going to be very, very important. Processing your emotions needs to be done in love and grace because many of you weren't allowed to feel certain things. So you suppressed it, shoved it away. So you're quick to judge your emotional state. I'm anxious. I have an anxiety disorder, or I'm feeling depressed. I'm going to be depressed. I'm going to have chronic depression. You know, those people in the sulker category can go in that place real quickly, right? Or people in the stuffer, they can be judgmental. Don't feel that way. Ignore that. I'm not feeling that way. I'm fine. Stiff upper lip kind of thing. And what's needed before we even address your emotions is love and grace. Love says, you are accepted in relationship right now in your current state. It's not, you'll be loved when you fix all these things. You're loved in your current state right now. And grace is God's power that's available to your heart, available right now for you to receive it, right? So grace also puts things into perspective because grace is a relational rhythm of interacting. So love and grace needs to be in there. And you need safe people that can provide that. Let's start with this. You need to be a safe person for yourself, in yourself, because the majority of people I interact and work with, we are so doggone hard on ourselves. If I went into your head and saw the thoughts that you'd have, I'd have to call child services because there's abuse going on in your head towards yourself. Because you're so quick to judge. You feel something and you judge it, and you become so judging. And because love and grace isn't there, your interpretation is off. You go, I just can't get out of bed. I can't get out of bed. You know why? Because I'm lazy. And you quickly judge. And you don't realize, you know what? You can't get out of bed because you're grieving something that you need to work through, and you just don't realize how it's affected you. So we can only really make progress when we allow ourselves to see our emotional world with love and grace. And the first line of what love delivers is the power of acceptance that you're received in. As children of God, when we said yes to the work of the cross, the power of God's love sets in motion. You are of the beloved. You're accepted. Even in your current emotional state, bring that. Bring that emotion to the surface. Let God in his love look at it with you. And that includes the deep discouragement. That includes the lust that comes to the surface, that goes in directions that you go, oh, it shouldn't go in that direction. I know it. I don't want it, but you're so ashamed that it's there. The love of God comes to surround that so that you can get to the heart of why you even struggle with that in the first place. But many times we can't even uncover that, right? Because we're so bound in shame, bound in condemnation, bound under the guilt and beating ourselves up in the self-hatred. So it is so critically important that we experience love and grace. And so we need people that will be, but it first starts with you being that for yourself, and then go be that for other people. Be a safe person. People say to me, how do I find safe people? Just start being safe. Just start being that person. Model it, demonstrate it. And I'm telling you, you'll be a magnet for others. And they say, how do I do that? Just establish love and grace in everything, and don't ever, ever, ever let it escape. Love and grace over everything, and be quick to listen. Be so fast to just listen. Ask questions that show care. How does that make you feel? How did you deal with that? How did you work through that? Be curious, not nosy. Be curious to learn from people. You see, sometimes when I talk to people and I'll ask good questions, I'm just learning how they tick. And I become a student of how they process life. I'm actually learning what they do. It doesn't mean that everything they do is healthy or I agree with, but I'm learning from them. Because when you learn someone's heart world, you appreciate it. You value it. If you don't, you're going to judge people. And you can't help anyone if you're judging them. You can't help anyone if you're condemning them. You can't help anyone if you're shaming them. If you're becoming the prosecuting attorney, you can't help them. So love and grace is so important. Now, next level on top of that is how you interpret an emotion or a feeling is going to be critical. What's the meaning here? What does this mean? So you could have an emotion. So you're married and you have an emotion of attraction towards someone who's not your spouse. What's the meaning you interpret to that? Now put love and grace and kindness around it. Okay. That emotion came up. I'm not going to beat myself up over it because thoughts and feelings, they'll come your way in every shape and form. What may be helpful is many times people have that and they suppress it and shove it down and they're scared of it. And then they're scared they're going to act on it. Some people could become obsessive compulsive. Other people then suppress it and then later on they can't take it anymore, so they live it out. Instead, in the love of grace of God, you just submit it to him and he'll probably show you why you may even struggle with that thought, because there's probably a wound underlying that he needs to heal. Because so many people, they'll have a wandering eye and they live it out, and maybe they'll cheat on their spouse and they go with somebody else, and then they repeat that cycle again because it's never fulfilled, because we never get to the heart of the matter. Or maybe you have a thought of sadness. You shove it down and push it away. Or maybe you just like, oh, I can't feel sad, or you don't know how to feel sad. Or maybe you spiral and you go, I'm in depression. I'm going to be in chronic depression the rest of my life. And it's like, wait, hold on. You just need some processing. What's the interpretation over this emotion of what you're feeling? Sometimes people will work with me and say, I've got a lot of like lust issues. I just lust after things, and they hate it. And I get you. It's because they love what's right and they hate what's wrong. The problem is they hate themselves too. See, you can hate what's wrong, but you don't hate yourself. That's not going to do any good. So they'll come and they'll say, here's a lust issue I have. Very shamefully, they'll share it. And, I hate to tell this to you, and this is hard for me to share. And I just respond in love and grace. I go, all right, we're going to work through this. And in the love and grace of God, we begin to discover why they struggle with that lust in the first place. We get to the interpretation of what's underneath this. Because many of the battles you have are symptomatic to something deeper in your heart that needs healing. We waste our time chasing symptoms because all these emotions come and we don't feel safe. We're not experiencing grace. So your interpretation of it is important. Many times you have a thought, just let the thought just pass on by. People that have obsessive tendencies like I did, every thought had a meaning to it. And so we'd be captured by all these thoughts rather than just seeing the thought and go, it's okay. It's okay. Just let the thought pass on by. See it like a plane flying by with a banner. There's that thought and it's creating emotion. It's like, you know what? I'm just going to let that thought just pass on by and I'm going to gently move into the next thought. Or there might be things you haven't grieved or stuff. Maybe you're manifesting in anger and you don't realize, hey, I'm angry because I've got some things I haven't dealt with. But your interpretation may be off. And this is where sometimes we need a coaching. We need someone else to create a mirror for us to look at things we're feeling with God's love, His grace, and His truth. And truth is always meant to set you free, not bind you more, not condemn you and shame you. Love and grace must be in the picture. In fact, truth must be spoken in love. So it requires love for it to have its work, right? It needs relationally connected love. So we recognize, okay, God's love is here. I don't have to be afraid of what this thought or emotion I'm struggling with. God, would you help me get to the bottom of this? You see, this is what the church needs, so we start having answers and help for people to help them and coach them to discover what's going on. Because otherwise we get stuck in our emotions, we hide in them, we suppress them, or we drown in them. So here's the key. In order to get healthy interpretation, we need the assistance of other mature people, but we also need to intentionally invite God. So in every emotion I've had in my life where I didn't know what to do with it, I've learned the art of inviting God into that intentionally. Now, God is with me all the time, but when I invite Him into it, I'm acknowledging His involvement in my heart. The best example of this in the scriptures is David. King David would write a psalm. We sing these, we love them, we read it, we get so much out of them, but sometimes he'd start a psalm and be like, God, where are you? What's going on? You've left me. I'm struggling. I have despair. My bones are aching. All this stuff, right? My bowels, some of the writers would say, my deep inner life is struggling. God, where are you in all this? It's so dark, so discouraging. But then later on in the same passage, he'd come out strong with his proclamation and his determination in a new pathway of faith, hope, and love. How did he do it? Processing his emotional life with God, inviting Him into it, and in it discovering. Because sometimes just what you need is you just need to get the emotion off your chest and not be shamed. And that can bring relief, and you go, I can step forward. I can make it. I can do this. Many people can name their emotions, but they don't do an exchange with God. So they just go, I'm angry that da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then they just walk away from that and they don't go further. So be honest with God, but don't stay there. Hang in it. Don't walk away. Hang in there and let the exchange happen. Isaiah 61 speaks of the exchange, where the beauty for ashes, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, right? So God wants to meet you in your emotional state and do an exchange with you. And there are times where you give Him your emotions and let Him meet you in that. And in it, you'll discover some gold. Now, I found for me in my life that whatever emotion I'm dealing with, doesn't matter, the whole spectrum of emotions, that when I invited God into it and I practice self-acceptance, which I talk about in my book, The Heart Healing Journey, I talk about this statement, and it's the statement of, it's okay that you're not okay. And I teach that to people and help them to realize you're in a state, it's okay, you're not okay. Love is here. Relationship isn't withdrawn because you feel this for a certain moment. That's a very up and down, all over the place God. He is a faithful God who sticks to His promise through all thick and thin. He's faithful to the end, right? That's something we need to learn in our hearts. So it's okay, you're not okay. And then in whatever it's feeling, maybe it's an anger issue I've had. I have many layers of being angry, or a deep discouragement, even depression, or anxiety, or a lustful passion. As I've allowed that to come to the surface and go, God, I receive your love and grace right now. Would you just speak to me about this? Give me interpretation. I invite you into this. So many times we judge and condemn ourselves. We quickly brush it away. We don't discover the area of the heart that God needs to address underneath. So you go, I struggle with anxiety over and over again. There may be a heart area. God's going, I'm going to become real in this area of your heart that's going to drown out that anxiety. I'm going to heal this place in your heart that fuels that anger. There's a place within you that's empty where lust has taken over. There's a trauma in your life that brought about lust. And all lust is passionate desire in the wrong places. And we live in a culture and a society where it's like, well, if you feel that, that's who you are, and right and wrong is being confused now. And we've lost the sense of God's truth having its operation. But God goes, I want to work with you in this and bring you into the truth that's going to set you free. So this stuff doesn't have to bind you now for the rest of your life. Many people that I work with who've had pornography addictions, for example, I've had to work with them on being able to, they're disconnected to the reality of their emotional life, and they've never been able to discover what's at the root system that causes them to find fulfillment in an addictive kind of behavior, to try to either check out and numb out to their pain or to fulfill some emptiness in their life that only God can really heal. And this is all in the discovery of how to deal with our emotions, right? So what I want to do is I want to give 2 practical applications to end this. And I hope you've gotten a lot out of this so far. Some of you, I think you're going to need to listen to this a couple times. Let it wash over your heart. Then a second time, take some notes on it. And then a third time, share it with all your friends so they can be blessed by it too, right? So here's tips for the stuffer category or the sulker category. Those who are more in the stuffer, you deny your emotions, suppress them, you don't deal with them, you don't think it's important, but you're becoming aware now. You need to practice in safety expressing, this is how I feel, on a daily, regular basis. Learning to connect with it yourself. Maybe you need to journal it. Maybe you need to audio record it. Maybe you need to speak with your spouse on a regular basis about it, a loved one or a mentor, to take it, put it out there. This is how I feel. Get some feedback on it to see if you're headed in the right direction, to exercise that muscle. Because once you start developing it, your life will never be the same. Your relationships will change, and you'll see so much more fulfillment in your life. Now, those of you that are more in the sulker, where you struggle, you get stuck in certain emotions, you're in emotional roller coasters a lot. Or like me, I would fall into deep self-pity. And it was like this demonic darkness of pity would come over me. And I realized this is something people can't pray off me. I've got to do business with this. I've got to get free from this. And I began to renounce it. And I began to invite nurture. People that are sulkers type. Sorry, it's a lot moving of L's there. They need nurture. And they need help in interpretation and meaning. A lot of times it's like, okay, it's how you feel, but it's not permanent. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. It's just something we're going through right now. And let's let God work on it. Let's not let the domino effect come into play of overwhelm. Because a lot of times what happens is the dominoes get stacked up and it just rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls, and we don't land into a productive place. So where do you find yourself in this? What questions come up as I've walked you through this? I pray it's a helpful coaching experience for you. Well, what questions does it bring to the table? If you have them, send them to me, mark@markdejesus.com. I love hearing some of the things that you're working through, maybe some of the questions that you have. If you want to take the next step, get the heart healing journey. Man, it'll really bless your life, especially as I get later into the book and get into some of the emotional stuff and aspects of that. Also, the book, God Loves Me and I Love Myself, is going to help you to see yourself with more compassion in the way that God sees you. Anyways, I pray this episode has been a blessing to your life. I look forward to our next episode next week. Feel free to send me your questions, and I look forward to more great stuff that we're going to share with you to help you to shepherd your heart, to cultivate a life flowing from a heart that is free. God bless you. See you next time.